The Death Devil is one of the most elusive devils in all of Chainsaw Man, the fourth and final of the Horsemen of the Apocalypse and what many consider to be the root of all fears. It's taken for granted by the fandom that the Death Devil is a primal fear, to the point that Wiki even listed it as one. However, to play the devil's advocate, I think there's a very good reason why the Death Devil might not actually qualify to be a primal fear devil, and it all stems from one very mind-blowing, but often overlooked part of the Chainsaw Man manga. And if you want to know what I mean by all this, then keep watching the video. If you find yourself entertained at any point during the video, then consider liking, subscribing and ringing that bell, as I cannot explain to you how much just a small action can do for this channel. And if you want to support this channel even further, then perhaps check out my Patreon. Anyway, on with the video. Now the Death Devil, although it has only been mentioned once, kind of twice, in the entire story, it's probably one of the most talked about devils in the entire fandom. Be it discussions on whether Yoshida is the Death Devil, he's not, or whether this thing is the Death Devil, she's not. Or the big question for today's video, is the Death Devil a primal fear? Well, first let's define what a primal fear devil is, as the criteria, honestly, it isn't all that clear. As far as the story itself details, the primal fears are particularly ancient and powerful devils embodying instinctual fears ingrained within the human psyche. They are said to be so strong as to be described as transcendent. So basically, really strong devils that embody our instinctual fears such as the fear of the dark or a fear of heights. It's also mentioned that they've never experienced death, but I don't see this as a specific criteria, as like if darkness dies, does it just suddenly cease to be an instinctual fear? I really don't think so. I think them having never died is more just a result of their immense power. So primal fears need to be instinctual and strong. That is all we have to go on in terms of a definition. And we know that Fujimoto isn't using any real life primal fear models for his devils. Like Dr. Albrecht's idea of the 5 primal fears, those being extinction, mutilation or bodily invasion, loss of autonomy, separation, abandonment or rejection, and humiliation, shame or worthlessness, clearly isn't the basis, as there is no falling or darkness in that list, and while we already have an isolation devil, which fits with the idea of separation, and that devil, it ain't a primal fear. You also can't use real life evolutionary primal fears either, as spider and snake are not primal fears either, or the definition of the 2 primal fears being falling or sound, as again darkness exists. So yeah, no arguments of, but death as a primal fear in the real world can be applied to Chainsaw Man. This is a unique system devised by Fujimoto himself, and as such all the devils that fit the criteria of primal fear do not reflect any real life system of what is primal fear in real life. But you might be saying, doesn't the Death Devil fit into his vague criteria? As yes, death is an instinctual fear, and yes, a devil based on the fear of death will be very strong. However, as I teased in the introduction to this video, there is a plot point in part 1 that could challenge this idea.
4 possible conclusions other than death at the end of living beings' lifespans, they've all ceased to exist.
These are Makima's direct words during the Control Devil arc in part 1. This is when she is describing all the concepts erased from reality by Chainsaw Man, which yes includes 4 other conclusions at the end of life. Before these 4 devils were eaten, reality was very different. The opposite of life was not death. Death was just one outcome to the end of life. Now you might disagree, but to me, one of the scariest parts of death is that you can never escape it. Everyone dies someday and you cannot change that fact. It is a universal rule that all who live must one day die. You can be as strong as possible, but you will still die one day. The slow march of death is one of the scariest things imaginable, because it will eventually catch you. Snakes are scary, but if you avoid where they live, you can convince yourself that they will never actually pose a threat to you. But the same can't be said of death. In this context, death is without a doubt worthy of being a primal fear, something we instinctually fear, the end we fear, and in terms of power, yeah, no question that this devil is strong, possibly the strongest in the entire series. However, what about before? What about before death was unavoidable? Before it was the end of life? Before it came to everyone equally? Could death have been rare back then? Could it have been preferable to the other conclusions? Could it be some abstract concept that people never really considered a real possibility? We don't know what these other ends were. All we know is that they weren't death, but they were an alternative. In such a world, could death still be considered a primal fear? If it lost the thing that made it so utterly terrifying and became just another scary aspect of life, but one that you could still avoid, is it still then meeting the criteria to be a primal fear? After these other concepts are erased, death would have become unavoidable, its power would skyrocket as it becomes mankind's #1 fear. But that wouldn't make it a primal fear. because once it wasn't. Unless Chainsaw Man's erasure powers warp reality to such an extent death just becomes a primal fear. Quick thing I wanted to just say as I was editing this video though, is that Death probably does have memories of these previous devils and the previous conclusions at the end of life, since Makima had memories of the erased devils and Yoru currently does, meaning that Horseman probably, for some reason we don't know yet, retain memories of the devils erased by Chainsaw Man. Also, since Yoru says that she physically got weaker after the World War II devil was and the Nukes devil were eaten, that does imply that her power literally changed. It got weaker rather than her power having been reality warped to always have been weaker, which would then mean that Death not only would have memories of the other concepts and memories of being weaker, it means that their power would have changed in the same way Yoru's power got weaker, Death's would have got stronger, and they would have noticed the change rather than it just have being reality warped to always be that way. So yeah, I think this kind of disproves the idea that if she wasn't a primal fear, she wouldn't be warped to being one now by Chainsaw Man's power. Yeah, sorry for the ramble, this came to me while editing, so let's get back to the main video. I mean, to be honest, couldn't one of these other conclusions have been a primal fear before it was erased? It's definitely possible. But the thing is, we just don't know. This is just a theory. No more like a fun thought experiment, let's be honest. A possible explanation for why the Death Devil might not be a primal fear. But yeah, speaking realistically, if I had to bet, I would say Death is just another primal fear. It just seems most likely. But hey, Fujimoto is not a writer I'd call predictable, so maybe this is true. But yeah, this theory is probably wrong. I do understand that. But it's a fun thought I wanted to share. Plus, if it is right, I'll look real big brain, now won't I? And if you want to go the extra mile in supporting this channel, then consider pledging to my Patreon, where for as little as £2.75 a month, you can get your name at the end of the video, like Hikari Desu, 7SO, Ringjack9696, Dewey, and General Tonyos. So with all that said and done, I've been Seth the Sin, the Deadly Sin of Geek, and I'm signing out. Stay safe, everyone.